Right, I'm going to talk to you about the importance of sleep. Nothing particularly... No, I don't think that there's no vocabulary or anything. You should be able to follow it okay. Right, sleep is the most important behavioral experience we have in our whole life. We spend about 1/3 of our lives asleep. If you live to the age of 90, you can expect to spend about 32 or 33 years of your life asleep. And society used to recognize the importance of this. In fact, Thomas Dekker, who was a dramatist in the 16th century, said, and I quote, "Sleep is the golden chain that ties health and our bodies together." Round about the same time, also the 16th century, Shakespeare said in one of his plays, "Enjoy the honey-heavy dew of slumber." So, as you can see, people used to understand the importance of sleep a few centuries ago. But if we jump forward 400 years or so, we can see dramatic changes in attitudes. In the 20th century, Thomas Edison, who invented the light bulb, said, "Sleep is a criminal waste of time." Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister of the UK, said, "Sleep is for wimps." Apparently she only slept a couple of hours a night. Or she said she did, we don't know if she had naps in between. So over the years, we've somehow gone from this attitude that sleep is precious, holy, absolutely essential, to an attitude that it's a waste of time and that people are weak if they allow themselves to sleep too much. Why do we think this? Well, possibly because on the surface it looks as if sleep isn't actually serving much function. When we sleep, we just close our eyes, lie there, and don't do anything. Or at least we don't seem to be doing anything. But it's just the impression, because actually the brain is very, very active when we're asleep. In fact, there are some parts of the brain which are more active when we're asleep than when we're awake. So as a result of this change in attitude, the fact that we think that sleep is not important, just something to be discarded, our society has become terribly sleep deprived. To give you a bit of a comparison, in the 1950s, the average person slept for about 8 hours a night. Now, the average person sleeps for 6 to 6.5 hours a night. For teenagers, it's even worse. Teenagers need 9 hours of sleep a night, but on average, they only get 5. Also for the elderly, they're also very sleep deprived, partly because as we get older, our mechanism for regulating sleep breaks down. So we find it harder to fall asleep and harder to stay asleep. Sleep becomes much more fragmented. So it's not that we need less sleep when we're old, it's just that we find it more difficult to get in all the sleep that we need. Similarly, shift workers are very sleep deprived. And this is important because with our society, which is increasingly active 24 hours a day, there are more and more people working shifts. And what happens is that if you do a night shift, you come out from your office or wherever early in the morning, you are absolutely exhausted because you've been awake all night. And so your body is saying, "I need to sleep, I'm exhausted, I need to recover my energy." But then another part of your body, your biological clock, is saying, "It's daytime, it's time to wake up." So you're essentially living in a permanent state of jet lag. So, as I was saying, as a society, we are now terribly sleep deprived. And we're getting it all wrong. It shouldn't be like this. We know that sleep is incredibly important. We don't know everything about it yet. And there's still a lack of scientific consensus on why sleep is important and how exactly it works. But there is nevertheless a broad agreement that sleep is important. Okay, now I'll give you 3 hypotheses as to why we need to sleep. Okay, hypothesis number 1 is sleep has incredible restorative powers. If you remember, I mentioned that there are certain areas of the brain that are active when we're asleep, but not when we're awake. Now, there are certain genes which are switched on when we're asleep. and these genes are associated with restoration. So sleep has incredible restorative powers. That's hypothesis number 1 as to why we sleep. Hypothesis number 2 is it helps us conserve energy, because obviously if you're lying there, not moving, not active, you're not going to spend so much energy. But it's not completely convincing as a hypothesis, because it turns out that sleeping for a night only really saves about 110 calories, which is about the same amount of energy as a hot dog bun. And so it's not very much energy, and it seems quite a meager return for such a complex, demanding behavior, because sleep is complex and demanding, and you would expect serious returns from it. The third hypothesis as to why we sleep, and this is the one that's most convincing, is that while we sleep, our brain processes the information that we've encountered during the day. It processes this information and then stores it as memories, and then allows us to recall these memories later. So, process of information, storage of memories, and recall of memories. And oddly enough, it also helps us become more creative. People who get a good night's sleep have been shown to be more creative, be more capable of coming up with creative solutions to problems. So we've said that sleep helps us process information and store memories, and this has been shown by giving people a learning task. They were told to learn something, and then one group was deprived of sleep, and the other group was allowed to sleep, and then the next day they were asked to recall the information that they'd learned, and the sleep-deprived group performed much worse than the group who had slept. The reason for this is that when we sleep, certain neural pathways in our brain are reinforced, the neural pathways that we use most frequently. So those are the neural pathways that allow us to learn. They're reinforced, while the neural pathways that we don't use so much fade away and stop wasting cerebral energy. Okay, so we've seen 3 hypotheses as to why we sleep. Now let's look at some of the results of sleep deprivation. Now, if you are sleep deprived, what often happens is that your brain has micro-sleeps. It might have happened to you without you even noticing. It's something that I wasn't aware of until I read about it, and then I suddenly realized it happens to me. What happens is your brain switches off just for a second. Your eyes stay open, it looks as if you're awake, but your brain's switched off. If you're having a conversation with someone, you might think that you might suddenly realize that you've missed that last sentence that they said. Or if you're reading, you might suddenly realize that you have no memory of the paragraph you've just read. It's because you were active, you looked as if you were active, but your brain was switched off. Another result of sleep deprivation is a loss of vigilance, poor judgment, and impulsiveness. And in fact, the Chernobyl disaster, when the nuclear station exploded, was attributed to bad performance by the workers there because they were sleep deprived. The same with, I don't know if you remember, a few years ago, the space shuttle, Challenger, crashed. There was a terrible accident and all of the astronauts on board were killed, and that was attributed to lack of sleep because the astronauts who were in charge of the space shuttle were sleep deprived, so they were not vigilant and they made poor decisions. So you can see it has very serious consequences. Another consequence of sleep deprivation is stress. Sleep deprived people are terribly stressed. Stress causes a rise in the levels of glucose in your blood, which can lead to diabetes. It causes raised blood pressure, which can lead to heart disease. It can lead to weight gain, which also brings its own health consequences. And sustained stress and sleep deprivation also lead to a lowering of the immune system in general, which means that you're susceptible to all sorts of diseases. And in fact, it's been shown that shift workers, who, as we said, are very sleep deprived, have a much higher rate of cancer than people who actually sleep at night. And then another marginal problem is if you can't stay awake during the day, often you're falling asleep, you're sleep deprived, you're tired, you drink coffee to try and stay awake. Then by the time it gets to 11 o'clock at night, it's bedtime, your body's tired, it wants to go to bed, but you've been drinking all this coffee, so although you're exhausted, you can't sleep. So then what do people do? Then they turn to alcohol. And, okay, fair enough, every now and then a bit of alcohol can maybe help you drift off to sleep, but it can all too easily become an addiction. The other problem with alcohol is that it doesn't give you high-quality sleep. It provides a biological mimic for sleep. So although, yes, it will help you drift off to sleep, it doesn't give you the kind of sleep that's restorative and that protects your health in the way we talked about. And let's finish with some advice on how to sleep better. You should make sure that the room is it is fairly cool and dark. Blot out as much of the light as you can. And if you can, you should reduce your exposure to light about half an hour before you go to bed. Try and avoid stimulation just before you go to bed, like TV, phones, computers. Switch off all that technology, just be calm before you go to bed. And try to avoid caffeine in the later part of the day. Ideally, you shouldn't have caffeine after lunch. And then in the morning, try and seek out natural light because you wake up, you're tired. As soon as natural light hits your eyes, it stimulates the brain to wake up. It tells the brain, it's morning now, it's time to wake up. So, in conclusion, we've clarified the importance of sleep. Far too often we see people feeling smug about how few hours they have every night. Don't feel smug about it. If you get your full 8 hours or 9 hours, however many hours you need, you will have better memory, you'll learn better, you'll be more vigilant, you'll have better judgment, you'll be a more productive human being. So go to bed and sleep your 8 hours tonight.